Chapter 12, Warning Signs. It would be naive to think that a project as world-changing as Bitcoin would go unnoticed forever. Oh, hang on. I forgot to start Audacity here. Make sure. There we go. Okay. Starting over. Chapter 12, Warning Signs. It would be naive to think that a project as world-changing as Bitcoin would go unnoticed forever. International financial powers, whether public or private, have a lot to lose if cryptocurrencies succeed and remain outside their influence. Despite the optimism and unity within the Bitcoin community during the early days, there were signs early on that things were not idyllic or free from internal disruption. I remember as early as 2011, when the price shot up to $30, the main discussion forum, bitcointalk.org, was flooded with spam, with bots suddenly posting endless threads of gibberish, making it impossible to use that forum to communicate. Somebody was paying attention and wanted to disrupt information flows, though it's not clear who. Animation, information, manipulation. Perhaps the first undeniable sign of trouble came in May 2013. The block size debate had already started, but even the most conservative developers agreed that the 1 megabyte limit had to be increased. The question was when and to what level. Various schemes were proposed. Some wanted a gradual increase to 2, to 4, then to 8 megabytes. Others proposed an adjustable block size limit that automatically adjusted itself based on the average size of recent blocks. And still others wanted to remove the limit altogether. But nobody thought that a maximum throughput limit of 7 transactions per second was a good idea. That is, not until the developer Peter Todd put out an animated video entitled, "Why the Block Size Limit Keeps Bitcoin Free and Decentralized." I consider Peter Todd's animation to be the first example of well-funded, blatant propaganda. It's so outrageous that it stretches credulity to think it was created from a mere difference in philosophy. The narrator explains how, in the name of decentralization, Bitcoin should cap itself to 1 megabyte blocks forever. We have an alternative to increasing the block size: off-chain transactions. You'll still use the blockchain for large transactions, but small exchanges will be handled by payment processors, which means small purchases like your morning coffee don't clog the whole system up. Unlike a completely public blockchain where you can't pick who mines your transactions or who you trust to do validation, off-chain transactions can be both instant, truly private, and you have complete control over who to trust. What can you do to keep Bitcoin decentralized? If you're a miner, only mine in pools that support keeping the block size limit, and ask your pool to publicly say so. If you are a user, ignore anyone trying to change the Bitcoin software you use to increase the 1 megabyte block size, and tell people you transact with that you support keeping Bitcoin decentralized and out of the hands of the existing corporate system. The absurdity of this proposal at the time cannot be overstated. While it sounds like something you might hear today, it was considered ridiculous in 2013, even by vocal small blockers like Greg Maxwell, who wrote, "I do cringe just a little at the oversimplification of the video, and worry a bit that in a couple years it will be clear that 2 megabytes or 10 megabytes or whatever is totally safe relative to all concerns Perhaps even mobile devices with Tor can be full nodes with 10 megabyte blocks on the internet of 2023. And by then, there may be plenty of transaction volume to keep fees high enough to support security. And maybe some people will be dogmatically promoting a 1 megabyte limit because they walked away from the video thinking that 1 megabyte is a magic number rather than today's conservative trade-off. Other Bitcoiners expressed anger and contempt for the animation throughout online forums. Not only was the content of the video ridiculed, but the disturbing fact that it came from an insider, the influential developer Peter Todd, also raised eyebrows. The feelings of the Bitcoin community were made clear in the comment section of the video. I hope these morons don't ruin Bitcoin by convincing people to keep the block size small. What better way to make sure that Bitcoin remains a tiny and irrelevant transactional medium? Went from information to disinformation at 55 seconds, full cringe at 128, and straight up Orwell at 228. This video is dangerous propaganda and marketing hogwash. You're being misled. Wake up! What kind of shit lies is this? It's okay up to 45 seconds. The rest describes a Bitcoin network that goes against the scaling abilities that Satoshi described. So keeping this limit would break that social contract with the users. To understand the vitriol directed at the creators of this video, it's worth dissecting the script a little further. To see how it advocated the exact opposite of everything Bitcoin stood for. Consider this section. We have an alternative to increasing the block size, off-chain transactions. You'll still use the blockchain for large transactions, but small exchanges will be handled by payment processors, which means small purchases like your morning coffee don't clog the whole system up. In other words, the alternative to using Bitcoin is not using Bitcoin. Relying on third parties to handle small payments is antithetical to the idea of digital cash. Small purchases do not clog up the system. The system was purpose-built for them. Restricting on-chain transactions to large amounts is restricting Bitcoin to wealthy users. Regular people cannot afford to pay an additional $5 for every cash transaction, much less $50 or $500+. And most countries around the world lack the infrastructure for cryptocurrency payment processing. Large transactions are also more likely to be controlled and regulated by financial authorities, especially when people are forced to use custodial wallets. The blockchain would offer no significant improvement over existing systems, since most people are not going to be purchasing a car, a house, or cashing out part of their retirement without government oversight. If Bitcoin can't be used for cash, most of the world won't use it at all. The script continues. Unlike a completely public blockchain where you can't pick who mines your transactions or who you trust to do validation, off-chain transactions can be both instant, truly private, and you have complete control over who to trust. Credit must be given to the creators for producing a truly impressive piece of propaganda. They create a problem out of a non-problem, then offer their novel solution, which is to not use Bitcoin in the first place. 99.9% of users have no reason to care who mines or validates their transactions. As long as their transactions are put into a block, that's what matters. And remember, users themselves can validate their own transactions without being a full node. They just can't validate the transactions of other people. Claiming that off-chain transactions are truly private is also false. In practice, the two off-chain solutions currently implemented, the Lightning Network and supposed side chains, are both heavily centralized for regular users. The failures of both these technologies are discussed later. Peter Todd's slick, misleading video was a milestone in Bitcoin's history, and it wasn't the only thing he did in 2013 that raised suspicions. Instant transactions? Too risky. Digital cash needs to have instant transactions. It's unrealistic to imagine any successful cryptocurrency being used as cash if its transactions take more than a few seconds to process. By design, Bitcoin allowed for instant transactions from the beginning, and I use them every day in my business and when evangelizing about Bitcoin. But despite the obvious importance of this feature, some core developers decided that instant transactions were too risky and intentionally broke Bitcoin's functionality to discourage them. As explained in Chapter 2, Bitcoin transactions get bundled into blocks by miners. Each block builds on the one before it, adding more security with each additional block. Imagine a transaction has just been added to a block. We'll call the first block Block 1. At that point, we would say the transaction has one confirmation. When Block 2 gets produced, it adds to the security of all the transactions in Block 1, and we'd say our original transaction now has 2 confirmations. The same is true for Blocks 3, 4, 5, and so on. Traditionally, in order to have extremely secure transactions, the rule of thumb is to wait until 6 blocks have been created, or 6 confirmations, which takes on average 1 hour. What about transactions that have been created, but have not yet been added to a block? These are called zero confirmation transactions, or zero conf for short. Zero conf transactions take only seconds to send and receive, though they are inherently less secure. Less than perfect security is not a difficult concept to grasp, nor is it a unique idea to any entrepreneur, but some developers apparently thought it was unacceptable. Let's say we wanted to game the system by taking advantage of zero conf transactions. Imagine that we have $200 worth of BTC. There are 2 stores in front of us, Alice's and Bob's, and we want to scam one of them. So we walk into Alice's store, purchase $150 worth of goods, and pay a $40 transaction fee. Our transaction is seen on the network, but it has not yet been added into a block. So we immediately walk into Bob's store, spend the same $150 of BTC. Since the same coins are trying to be spent twice, a double spend, both transactions cannot be added into a block. Only one will be accepted and included in the blockchain, which means either Alice or Bob will be defrauded $150. The way Bitcoin is designed, this is theoretically possible, and occasionally double spends do happen. Does this mean the system is broken? Of course not. The simple, elegant solution has been part of Bitcoin's design from the beginning. It's called the first seen rule. Miners and nodes keep a running list of zero conf transactions that are waiting to be added into a block. The first seen rule says that whenever there are 2 conflicting transactions, whichever one was seen first wins. So, in our previous example, after sending the $150 to Alice, the Bitcoin network would already know about this transaction and simply reject the attempt to double spend it with Bob. The first seen rule was not mandatory or enforced at the protocol level. It was a simple, sensible policy for miners and nodes to abide by, since it allowed for instant transactions. However, it also allowed for elaborate theoretical schemes to defraud merchants, say, by collaborating with corrupt miners. Despite there being social and economic incentives which discourage this corruption, and despite the ability of entrepreneurs to manage these risks as they already do with other payment methods, some developers thought that any theoretical insecurity was a design flaw that needed to be fixed at the code level. So they came up with the idea of an undo button. The undo button. Instead of the first seen rule, Peter Todd proposed the replace by fee, RBF patch, which said that when two conflicting transactions are seen, the one with the higher fee wins. So, after sending Alice the $150 transaction with a $40 fee, we could walk into Bob's store, spend the same $150 with a $50 fee, and the network would accept the second transaction as valid. Such a policy makes double spending easy, effectively breaking the reliability of zero-conf, which was the explicit goal of Todd. In the online forums, Peter Todd posted a thread entitled, "Reminder, zero-conf is not safe. $1,000 reward posted for replace by fee patch," in which he wrote, "Someone by the name of John Dillon emailed me the Bitcoin development email list earlier this morning, offering a $500 US reward, later increased to $1,000, to anyone who implements a transaction replacement by fee patch. That's an idea I posted on the email list 2 days ago." In any case, the more pressing issue is changing fees attached to transactions after they have been broadcast. The more I think about the issue, the more I think we should nip this zero-conf madness in the bud. Change the relay rules so that transactions are replaced based on fees, regardless of how that changes transaction outputs. Of course, this does make double spending an unconfirmed transaction trivial. On the other hand, it lets us implement a limited undo button for when people screw up. We keep saying over and over again to stop accepting zero-conf transactions, but people do it anyway because it seems secure. It's a very dangerous situation. Like it or not, zero-conf is dangerous when you don't trust the other party. I wrote the above replace by fee idea because I really think we run a risk if we lull people into complacency. The blockchain and the proof of work system is how Bitcoin comes to a consensus about which transactions are or are not valid. Trusting anything else is dangerous. It's worth walking through the logic of Todd's argument. He starts with the supposed problem of users getting their transactions stuck, which was only an issue for transactions with extremely low or zero fees. Though ironically, stuck transactions did become a real issue when the blocks became full and fees spiked in 2017. When users' transactions were stuck, sometimes for days or even weeks, RBF was indeed used to unstick those transactions. So, with small blocks, high fees, and unreliable transactions, RBF starts to make more sense. Then he gets to the real point. In his mind, zero-conf transactions aren't safe enough, and uninformed users just don't realize it. So to prevent people from getting attached to zero-conf transactions, RBF would break their functionality once and for all. Because, in his words, if the miners decided to implement something like RBF, zero-conf would break anyway. In other words, Bitcoin's instant payment functionality needed to be broken by developers at the software level, so that miners wouldn't end up breaking it in the future. That is, unfortunately, not an exaggeration of their position. John Dillon, the mysterious financier of this patch, explained, "I'm not offering this reward because I think an undo button is important. The problem is people like Mike Hearn will be more than happy to screw up Bitcoin in a desperate attempt to stop double spins when it becomes a big issue. By breaking zero-conf security now, there won't be pressure to implement his centralized crap. The most badly affected will be Satoshi Dice, and they should not be using the blockchain the way they do." And in 2015, while this debate was still ongoing, the well-known programmer Bram Cohen agreed. To say that zero-conf, just an aside, I think Bram Cohen programmed BitTorrent, if I'm not mistaken. To say that zero-conf doesn't work is an oversimplification. Zero-conf works okay, for now, but if it's used at any meaningful scale and unstoppable, let's just skip that part. But if it's used at any meaningful scale, an unstoppable conspiracy will inevitably emerge to exploit those relying on it. Rather than wait for disaster to strike, Bitcoin development should plan to cease zero-conf support in a scheduled and orderly manner, with the changeover happening before either the conspiracy gets built or harm is done to the functionality which zero-conf support conflicts with. Solutions outside code. It shouldn't be surprising that software developers try to solve problems with software. But this tendency can turn into myopia if left unchecked. Or, as Gavin Andreessen put it, engineers are great at not seeing the forest for the trees. They get stuck on details and lose track of the bigger picture. The bigger picture in this context is the world outside Bitcoin's code. Entrepreneurs have been solving problems with less than perfect payment security for thousands of years, using far inferior technology than cryptocurrency. A great insight into this was written by Justice Ranveer, an engineer with real-world experience, who replied to Peter Todd's forum post about RBF by saying, "Security in this context is being inappropriately treated like a binary concept. There's an entire consumer economy out there based around charge cards, which, in Bitcoin terms, take 90 days to confirm transactions. Trillions of dollars are being transacted out in the real world via payment methods that are no less insecure than zero-confirmation Bitcoin transactions. Accepting zero-conf transactions is an issue of risk management and business planning, not a case of secure versus insecure." And elsewhere writes, "You've spent too much time playing The Sims and forget that both merchants and pool operators are sentient, intelligent beings instead of automatons. If the risks of zero-conf double spins are worth expending resources to reduce or eliminate, then the merchants will find a way to get it done. Indeed, cryptocurrency payment processors are well aware of the risks of double spending and have various options for managing it. The simplest option is for the payment processor to take on the risk for their customer in return for a fee, payment insurance essentially. Or they can require customers to use a particular wallet app to pay for goods, which makes it more difficult to execute a double spend. Without RBF, pulling off a double spend is difficult and not worth the hassle to steal small amounts. But for large purchases, it might be expected that customers have to wait for a confirmation or two. In fact, companies like Satoshi Dice that were providing gambling services on Bitcoin had already implemented a system that allowed instant transactions for small amounts, but large amounts required confirmations. Zero-conf transactions are especially important for brick-and-mortar payments. Given that only a tiny percentage of customers try to steal from businesses in person, some merchants might simply accept the risk of double spends themselves. Traditional options for mitigating the risk of fraud or theft still work. If they already have security systems in place, for example, they might be able to get footage of the criminal. These are just a handful of ideas to address zero-conf security concerns. I'm sure even better solutions would have been found if double spends ever became a real problem. Markets are exceptionally good at discovering and managing risk. Replace by fee prompted many people to speak out against it. Charlie Lee, who was the engineering manager at Coinbase, said, Coinbase fully agrees with Mike Hearn. RBF is irrational and harmful to Bitcoin. Jeff Garzik, an early Bitcoin Core developer, agreed. Repeating past statements, it is acknowledged that Peter's scorched earth replaced by fee proposal is aptly named and would be widely antisocial on the current network. Gavin Andreessen said flatly, replaced by fee is a bad idea. Even Adam Back, who later played a big role in derailing Bitcoin, agreed. I agree with Mike and Jeff. Blowing up zero confirmation transactions is vandalism. Yet, in late 2015, RBF was successfully added to Bitcoin Core. At present, RBF transactions are created with a flag, so merchants can refuse to accept them if they are careful. But developers are currently debating whether to change this default setting. If the flag is ever removed, zero-conf payments on BTC will effectively have zero security. Zero-conf payments are understood to be an essential feature in Bitcoin Cash, and developers have been actively working on ways to further improve their security and reliability. Sheer propaganda. Despite the controversy surrounding RBF, if you try to research it today, you will undoubtedly encounter misleading information. On the Bitcoin Core website, there is a Q&A section on RBF. One question reads, was the opt-in RBF pull request controversial? Not in the slightest. After extensive informal discussion, stemming back months, the PR was opened on October 22, 2015. It was subsequently discussed in at least 4 Bitcoin development weekly meetings. In the PR discussion, 19 people commented, including people working on at least 3 different wallet brands, and 14 people explicitly agreed with the change, including at least one person who had been very outspoken in the past against full RBF. No clearly negative feedback was provided in the PR or elsewhere that we are aware of, while the PR was open. This section is carefully worded so the casual reader walks away thinking RBF was not controversial. Notice the question is about the pull request, PR, not the overall concept of RBF. That is, if you only look at the comment section for that particular action on GitHub, the majority of people on that thread agreed with it. But that's only because an enormous amount of debate simply took place in other venues. The dates involved are also misleading. They claim the informal discussion stretched back months from the end of 2015. But, as the bitcointalk.org forum thread demonstrates, RBF was being hotly debated as early as 2013. The Q&A says, no clearly negative feedback was provided in the PR or elsewhere that we are aware of. while the PR was open. My emphasis. But the pull request was opened in October 2015. Mike Hearn wrote an extensive dissenting article on his own website criticizing Replace by Fee in March 2015, 7 months prior. In a different section, the Q&A asked, I heard opt-in RBF was added with little or no discussion, and it answers with a list of a dozen links to recent RBF discussions going back to May 2015. It entirely omits the fact that RBF was a bubbling controversy only 2 months earlier. This careful control of information is designed to mislead newcomers about Bitcoin, and it makes it exceptionally difficult to discover the truth about its history. Who was John Dillon anyway? The history of Bitcoin is intertwined with mysterious figures, starting with its unknown creator, Satoshi Nakamoto. But Satoshi is not the only shadowy figure. John Dillon is another, and not much is known about him. Dillon was the man who offered to pay $1,000 to develop the Replace by Fee patch proposed by Peter Todd. As it turns out, Dillon also supported and paid Todd for his work, creating the infamous 1 megabyte forever animated video. When Todd announced he was working on the video, Dillon wrote, "It is so important that you are taking this message to the people. Bitcoin is much bigger than this little forum. I suspect there is a lot more Bitcoin activity going on that doesn't give a damn about Bitcoin as a payment system." Peter mentioned Silk Road, which is brilliant, I think. It is an off-chain transaction system already. As a serious Bitcoin investor, I also care about the store of value, not stupid micropayments. And I know my partners feels the same way. We also know that Bitcoin's value has very little to do with being a payment system. Once the infamous animation was produced, Dillon wrote, "I finally got a chance to see your video. It's solid professional work. You have done a great job. You'll soon get another 2.5 BTC from me by the same method I used before. Nice to see that big 10 BTC donation you got, and from an address with 125 BTC. It really says something how many of the donations you have been getting all come from addresses with large balances of Bitcoins. About 250 BTC and counting right now. It just goes to show how the people most heavily invested in Bitcoins are the ones with the most to lose from centralization and regulation. Keep up the fight." Dillon was not just any enthusiastic small blocker. He was apparently having extensive conversations with some core developers, and at one point, Gavin Andreessen remarked, "I've started to suspect Jay Dillon is a very sophisticated troll with the ulterior motive of destroying Bitcoin." Gavin's suspicions might have been correct. In November 2013, Dillon was apparently hacked by some angry Bitcoiners when his Bitcoin Talk account posted its own thread entitled, "John Dillon. We can leak things too, you trolling piece of shit." The post contained a single link to an archive of private correspondence from Dillon, as well as conversations about him from other developers. The authenticity of the leak has not been disputed. Dillon appears to be coordinating with Todd and funding multiple projects that supported transforming Bitcoin into an expensive settlement system. Peter Todd himself was apparently aware that people had become suspicious of the connection to Dillon. In an IRC chat, Todd and Greg Maxwell wrote, "Peter Todd, everyone knows John and I know each other. If anything, I'd like my PGP signature on his key to make the nature of that relationship understood." G. Maxwell, I think half the people think you and John are the same person. Tongue out emoticon. Peter Todd. Ha! I know. I'll admit he kind of creeps me out a bit sometimes. He's admitted he reads all my posts religiously. But by far the most interesting exchange is an email between Dylan and Todd, in which Dylan claims to be involved with the intelligence community, saying, "Just so you know, this stuff about Tor has me worried. Please don't make this public, but my day job involves intelligence, and I'm in a relatively high position. You know, I went into the job years ago with very different thoughts about it than I do now. The last, decade really has changed a lot of minds in this field in totally different ways. Myself, I am on the side of Snowden and Assange, but let's just say when you have a family, your willingness to be a martyr diminishes. The same is true of many of my colleagues. Hopefully my support for Bitcoin can help undo some of the damage we've done, but I do have to be careful, and it's tough to take all the precautions I need to be able to communicate. If it was found out that I was involved with Bitcoin that way I have been, let's just say there would be consequences." To which Todd seems to respond concerned. "I mentioned your status to a friend of mine who is a former spook and well aware of the dangers of the business to anyone with a sense of ethics. He told me to tell you this, word for word. An old crow strongly advises you to consider the risks to yourself and your family and stop what you were doing. I trust his judgment, and just as importantly, his ethics. Be careful. Myself, I suggest you think hard about whether or not what you are doing has had enough of an impact on your goals to be worth it. I can't answer that question for you." These emails read like something out of a spy novel. It's impossible to know whether Dylan was telling the truth, but it's worth noting how suspicious the whole situation is. John Dylan is the pseudonym of an unknown person who paid Peter Todd, a core developer, to produce a video promoting the restriction of Bitcoin's throughput to 7 transactions per second. He offered a bounty to develop replace by fee, which was intended to break zero-conf security now. That is, to break the functionality of instant transactions. Gavin Andreessen publicly speculated that Dylan had an ulterior motive to destroy Bitcoin. And later it turns out, in leaked emails, that Dylan claimed to be in a high position within an intelligence agency. But not to worry, because he also claimed to have a change of heart and really wanted Bitcoin to succeed. All of this happened around the most revolutionary financial invention in history, which directly challenges established governmental, financial, and banking powers around the world. Readers can come to their own conclusions, but in my mind, by late 2013, Bitcoin had already been targeted for capture. Chapter 13. Blocking the Stream. Open source software development is notorious for lacking a straightforward business model. It's often unclear how programmers should get paid for their work when their final product is free and open to the public. Some projects will ask users for voluntary donations. Others will offer premium support for companies and institutions. Cryptocurrency projects are especially tricky because the software is a financial product. Any mistake can directly affect the wallets of millions of people. Different groups have tried different strategies to finance their own development. A simple donation model has worked for some. Others will set aside a large pile of coins at their genesis to create a foundation that oversees development. Some projects will give a percentage of the block reward straight to the programmers. Lots of creative models have been tried. Bitcoin development is yet another open source project with an awkward business model. Given its world-changing importance, scale, and complexity, every setup that has been tried has caused controversy, for good reason, since the integrity of the entire system depends on the mechanism by which the developers get paid. Funding and governance go hand in hand, and potential conflicts of interest among developers are a critical threat, as the most straightforward way to corrupt a project is to corrupt its funding mechanism. The Bitcoin Foundation. Unlike many of the development groups today, Bitcoin started out as a project among volunteers. As it grew in popularity, questions about compensation naturally arose. The earliest attempt to create a more formal organization around the maintenance of the software came in 2012, with the creation of the Bitcoin Foundation, which modeled itself on the Linux Foundation. The Bitcoin Foundation accepted donations from large companies and other interested parties. I myself donated to it and was a founding board member. Its most important goal was to provide funding for Gavin Andresen as the chief scientist and lead maintainer for Bitcoin Core. In an interview with The New Yorker, Andresen explained, "The Linux Foundation provides a bit of a center for Linux, and to pay the lead developer, Linus Torvalds, so that he can do nothing but concentrate on the kernel. It's a tricky thing. Once you get to be a certain size as an open source project, how do you sustain yourself? Linux is the most successful open source project in the world, so we thought it would make sense to use that as a model." Another goal of the foundation was to improve the reputation of Bitcoin with regulators and the general public, since it was frequently smeared as a currency for criminals at that time. Andresen stepped down as lead maintainer in early 2014 to focus more on scientific research and duties with the Bitcoin Foundation. That April, he wrote, "A few years ago, I created a Google Scholar alert for Bitcoin, and I was happy if I got one alert per month. Today, I find it harder and harder to keep up with all of the great computer science or economics papers related to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. In just the last week, Mr. Google told me about 30 new papers I might be interested in reading." To be clear, I'm not going to disappear. I'll still be writing and reviewing code and offering my opinions on technical matters and project priorities. I enjoy coding, and I think I'll be most effective as chief scientist if I don't lose touch with engineering reality and make the mistake of building huge, beautiful, theoretical castles that exist only as white papers. Unfortunately, Andresen did not have much time before the foundation started to fall apart due to bad management, a lack of transparency, and a series of petty scandals. By the end of 2014, the organization was dysfunctional, with some board members getting into trouble with the law. In April 2015, it was announced that the foundation was effectively bankrupt and would not be able to raise enough money to continue funding development. So, later that month, Andresen joined a new project at MIT's Digital Currency Initiative, where he would continue to develop Bitcoin along with two other core coders, Vladimir van der Laan and Corey Fields. With the failure of the Bitcoin Foundation, and with van der Laan as the lead maintainer, Bitcoin would slowly be transformed into a different project over the next 3 years. In a different world, if the foundation had succeeded, it's unclear whether this transformation could have ever happened. Reflecting on this question, Mike Hearn would later write, "One of the problems with cryptocurrency, philosophically, is that the commitment to decentralization tended to be interpreted as, or spun as, a general rule against institutions and processes of any kind. Both me and Gavin were involved in setting up the Bitcoin Foundation early on, but it sputtered out, partly due to being set up too fast and too many rum characters getting involved, but mostly because these pseudo-libertarians bent themselves towards the goal of wrecking it on the grounds that Bitcoin shouldn't have a foundation or a formalized development process. This left the community not with a decentralized utopia, but rather with a vague, informal, and cliquey development process driven by back-channel dealing, manipulative attempts to define individual positions as consensus, and the purchasing of developers. If the community had rallied around Gavin's attempt to organize the community with a set of institutions, things might have worked out differently, as it'd have had greater this is difficult to say. I'm going to say as it would have had greater built-in resistance to being hijacked. While the failure of the Bitcoin Foundation was significant, the most important changes to the software development structure came in late 2014, when some core developers formed their own company called Blockstream. Blockstream is founded. Blockstream would end up being the most influential company in Bitcoin's history. Its co-founders were Adam Back, Gregory Maxwell, Peter Weil, Matt Corallo, Mark Friedenbach, George Timon, Austin Hill, Jonathan Wilkins, Francesca Hall, and Alex Fowler. Unlike the Bitcoin Foundation, Blockstream was founded as a for-profit company, a fact that made other Bitcoiners immediately curious about their business model. Greg Maxwell was asked about it during an Ask Me Anything session on Reddit and provided a hand-wavy answer. We believe there is a vacuum in the industry, not just Bitcoin, but computing in general, for cryptographically strong, trustless technology. We think there is a tremendous business potential in building and supporting infrastructure in this space, some connected to Bitcoin and some not. For example, by acting as a technology and services provider, e.g., by acting as a technology and services provider for other businesses and helping them migrate to a more Bitcoin-like way of doing business. Right now, our focus is on building out the base infrastructure so that there is actually a place to build the revenue-producing business we'd like to have. And then we hope to circulate that back into building more good technology. Blockstream was successful in creating a revenue-producing business, but it turned out to be a serious conflict of interest. Instead of building out the base infrastructure, it crippled the base infrastructure. And now offers paid solutions to the problems it created. The fact that Greg Maxwell would be employed to work on critical infrastructure is ironic, given his admission that he previously thought the key technological mechanism used by Bitcoin was not even possible. When Bitcoin first came out, I was on the cryptography mailing list. When it happened, I sort of laughed because I had already proven that decentralized consensus was impossible. When Blockstream was initially formed and raised their first round of fundraising, I initially thought it was a good sign that more investors were discovering Bitcoin. But as time went on, and it was revealed that their biggest investors came from the establishment banking industry, I became more skeptical, along with countless other Bitcoiners. Now, in hindsight, I consider the founding of Blockstream the beginning of the Civil War era. Shortly after its formation, the culture shifted, disagreements turned hostile, and the most radical small block position, which hardly anybody had taken seriously, became more vocal and aggressive. Blockstream engineers started to insist that Bitcoin could not scale the way it was originally designed, while censorship began in the online forums. The passivity of the lead developer, von der Leyen, who wanted to avoid conflict, started to be exploited in favor of the status quo. The core developers became adamant that consensus was needed among them in order to raise the block size limit, effectively giving them a complete veto over the scaling protocol. Why would a group of developers form a company to take over a project and then prevent it from scaling? The answer turns out to be simple. Their business model depends on Bitcoin not scaling its base layer. The less Bitcoin can do, the more Blockstream can do for a fee. The business model. Blockstream raised suspicions soon after it was founded and has been the subject of innumerable conspiracy theories, some more plausible than others. For years, people have speculated that the bizarre behavior of the core developers is best explained by a conflict of interest, if either Blockstream or their investors profit by throttling Bitcoin. Sorry. Okay. But today, we no longer have to speculate, because they speak openly about it. In a Forbes interview, CEO Adam Back shared one part of their monetization strategy, saying, Blockstream plans to sell sidechains to enterprises, charging a fixed monthly fee, taking transaction fees, and even selling hardware. What are sidechains? The company's white paper explains the general idea. We propose a new technology, pegged sidechains, which enables bitcoins and other ledger assets to be transferred between multiple blockchains. This gives users access to new and innovative cryptocurrency systems using the assets they already own. By reusing Bitcoin's currency, these systems can more easily interoperate with each other and with Bitcoin, avoiding the liquidity shortages and market fluctuations associated with new currencies. Since sidechains are separate systems, technical and economic innovation is not hindered. In other words, sidechains are an attempt to link different blockchains together by connecting entries on one ledger with entries on another. It's a neat idea, and in theory, it could allow for more creative experimentation. Different rules and networks could operate on different ledgers, but remain interoperable with Bitcoin. This is why sidechains have been proposed as an alternative method for scaling Bitcoin, since different projects can still be pegged to the Bitcoin blockchain without being directly built on top of it. Let's take an example to make the concept of sidechains clear. Imagine a new blockchain designed for nanopayments of a millionth of a penny or less, smaller than even the original Bitcoin was designed for. Let's call it nanobits or NBT. Instead of being a totally isolated blockchain, nanobits could have a sidechain integration with the Bitcoin blockchain, allowing users to lock up their Bitcoin in exchange for NBT. For example, by locking up 0.001 BTC, you could unlock 1 billion NBT. Then, if users want to trade their coins back to the BTC blockchain, they could swap the billion NBT back into BTC. If done correctly, this type of system would allow for more innovation, since the sidechains can operate with totally different rules, allowing different development teams to experiment without needing to persuade the entire community to add their changes. Plus, this innovation can occur without fear of breaking the main chain, since any new failures and flaws would be isolated to the sidechain. That's how it might work in theory. In practice, it's a different story. The idea of sidechains has always appealed to me, and I have personally funded their development on BTC with the Drive Chain project, led by Paul Stork. Like any software project, creating a working implementation has proven much more difficult than creating a nice-sounding idea. Done correctly, sidechains should not require any trust in centralized authorities in order to work, which is what the Drive Chain project is trying to do. Blockstream has released their version of a sidechain called the Liquid Network, but it works very differently. The Liquid Network is a federated sidechain, which is better understood as a centralized sidechain or even an altcoin. The basic security of their network requires trust in a small, hand-selected group they call the Liquid Federation. According to their website, the Liquid Federation is a group of cryptocurrency businesses, including exchanges, trading desks, infrastructure companies, game developers, and more. The Federation fulfills a number of tasks that are integral to the Liquid Network's operation. There are currently only 15 members of this Federation, and if more than a third of them become dishonest, the security of the network would break, and users could lose their money. Not only is the network centralized, but after swapping your BTC for liquid tokens, you are no longer using the Bitcoin network. Instead, you are using Blockstream's proprietary Liquid Network, and every single transaction fee goes to a wallet controlled by them. It's a lucrative system. Liquid is a sidechain, which means transaction fees are not paid to Bitcoin miners. They are paid directly to Blockstream. Why would somebody choose to swap their BTC for liquid tokens? One reason is quite simple. The fees on BTC are too high. Adam Back, the CEO of Blockstream, has brazenly advertised his Liquid Network as a solution to the problem of high fees on the main network, saying on Twitter, "If you are actively trading and don't like high fees, use exchanges with liquid integration, or complain to an exchange that doesn't. Pay 1 to 2 cents to clear in 2 minutes final, while others are paying 50 cents. $2.50 for 1 hour plus transfer. Be part of the solution." To be clear, this is the CEO of Blockstream, the company that employed a majority of the most powerful Bitcoin core developers during its most critical time period, directing people to his proprietary blockchain to be part of the solution to high fees and network congestion. Meanwhile, the BTC network only has poor performance because the Bitcoin core developers refuse to increase the block size limit in the first place. The conflict of interest is enormous. It certainly looks like Blockstream is selling a paid solution to problems they caused. And it's not even clear whether the Liquid Network would have a reason to exist if Bitcoin had big blocks. A banker's dream. Capturing all the transaction fees from the Liquid Network is not the only way that Blockstream profits from it. They also charge a monthly fee to companies integrating Liquid and are releasing tokens on their network. In 2020, Blockstream announced that they had become technical partners with a new startup called Avanti, which is trying to be a cryptocurrency-friendly bank. According to their website, Avanti is a new breed of bank, a software platform with a bank charter, built to connect digital assets with the legacy financial system. Our team is deeply experienced in both. We're not just a bank, we're a depository institution, which means we're eligible to become a US dollar clearing bank at the Federal Reserve. Within the small block vision, banks continue to play a critical role in the future financial system by being the primary entities that access the blockchain. So it makes sense for Blockstream to position themselves as key players in that system, offering technical services, consultation, and their own proprietary network as an alternative to Bitcoin. This strategy has worked so far. Avanti recently announced they were entering the lucrative digital asset market by issuing tokens, AVIT, that they claim will be redeemable for $1, though not fully backed by dollars. A CoinDesk article explains, while AVIT would not be pegged one-to-one to the US dollar because it's a new digital asset, not a digital representation of a real-world asset, the currency would be 100% backed by a reserve of traditional US assets. In other words, Avanti Bank will issue tokens that are redeemable for $1 without actually being backed by dollars. The real assets backing their token will provide them with yield instead. While there is nothing inherently wrong with this business model, it's another example of cryptocurrencies being assimilated into the traditional financial system without taking advantage of crypto's unique properties. Bank tokens backed by a reserve of traditional US assets are not inflation-proof, censorship-resistant, or disruptive to the status quo. Because they provide yield, they even come with risk of default. If the bank issuing the tokens goes bankrupt, users will end up losing money, once again demonstrating why currencies that do not require trusted third parties are so attractive. Considering that the narrative surrounding Bitcoin is that it's disruptive to the established financial industry, there is some irony in the fact that Blockstream is integrating with banks to help them issue digital dollars. In addition, they are even starting to integrate directly with governments and help them with fundraising. In El Salvador, Blockstream has helped to create a Bitcoin bond to help the state raise $1 billion, paying out an annual dividend to holders. Both the Bitcoin bond and AVIT tokens will be built on the Liquid network, diverting even more traffic from BTC to Blockstream's sidechain. The conflict of interest between Bitcoin core developers and Blockstream is easy to see. With such perverted incentives, it's no surprise that Satoshi's vision of cheap, peer-to-peer transactions on the base layer was abandoned. Big blocks would kill their business model. By contrast, on Bitcoin Cash, anybody can create tokens and transact them on-chain with minimal fees. Sidechains and custodial wallets are not needed to scale, since the base layer can handle a much higher transaction throughput. Though, if desired, sidechains and custodial wallets will work with big blocks and would perform better. Conspicuous fundraising. The details of Blockstream's multiple rounds of fundraising have not helped their image nor quelled the conspiracy theories surrounding the company. To date, they have raised around $300 million from investors. Nearly a third of $1 billion is a substantial amount for any company to raise, but especially for one working on open source software. In early 2016, eyebrows were raised when Blockstream completed a $55 million round of Series A funding. One of the primary investors was a venture capital firm called AXA Strategic Ventures, a branch of the French multinational firm AXA, the 11th largest financial services company in the world, according to Fortune Global 500. At the time, the CEO of AXA was Henry de Castries, a magnate of the international financial system. In a 2015 news article, the Guardian newspaper described de Castries as follows. Henry de Castries might just be the most powerful man in the world. He is chief executive and chairman of one of the world's biggest insurers, AXA, and a member of France's illustrious noble house of Castries. But de Castries is also chairman of the Bilderberg Group, a collection of political and business leaders from Europe and North America that meets in private every year to debate megatrends and major issues facing the world, or which is secretly running the world, if you are a conspiracy theorist. As if the mysterious John Dillon wasn't enough fodder for conspiracy theories, Bitcoin's history also includes a real connection to the Bilderberg Group. For decades, the Bilderberg Group has been controversial due to its highly secretive meetings and their attendance by some of the most powerful people in the world, a who's who of elites from across political, financial, academic, and media industries. The organization has been operating since the 1950s and includes far too many powerful attendees to name, ranging from heads of state like Tony Blair and Bill Clinton, to European royalty like the kings of Belgium, Norway, and Spain, business magnates like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, and a long list of CEOs and founders of large companies, banks, and news outlets across the world. Naturally, when a large number of powerful people get together and hold secretive meetings, conspiracy theories are inevitable, whether or not they are justified. We know from history that some conspiracies are real, and it's naive to think meetings like this are not influencing world affairs to some extent. That's why they hold them in the first place. Their real-world impact is unknown, but it is definitely greater than zero. Ultimately, it is impossible to know the significance of these connections. It could be a delightful coincidence that Blockstream was funded by a venture capital firm whose parent company is one of the largest financial companies in the world, whose CEO is the chairman of the Bilderberg Group. I truly do not know, but at the very least, the connection is too intriguing not to mention here, and is another part of Bitcoin's colorful history. Researchers have tried to follow the money flowing into Blockstream over the years, and while there are plenty of interesting connections and possible conflicts of interest, nothing is unambiguous. For example, the Digital Currency Group is another venture capital firm which has raised suspicions after investing in a huge range of cryptocurrency projects, Blockstream included. When the firm was created in 2015, their initial funding came from establishment financial companies, including MasterCard, a direct competitor of Bitcoin. Yet, there's nothing definitive that links MasterCard to a nefarious plot to capture Bitcoin's development. While they undoubtedly knew about Bitcoin's potential for disruption, it's impossible to know the intentions behind their investment. Perhaps they just wanted to ride the wave of cryptocurrency investment and innovation. Or perhaps they wanted influence over the company with the most control over Bitcoin's code. I can easily imagine both scenarios. Blockstream's largest fundraising round came in 2021, when it raised over $200 million in Series B funding, bringing its valuation to $3.2 billion. This enormous haul came several years after the capture of key Bitcoin core developers, a significant loss of total market share of BTC, the Bitcoin Cash split in 2017, and multiple network failures which saw skyrocketing transaction fees and dramatically increased confirmation times. One interpretation, from a purely business perspective, is that investors believe Blockstream's alternative network will generate significant revenue in the future by competing with the main BTC network for transactions. A less charitable interpretation is that Blockstream received a large payoff for crippling Bitcoin's development at a critical time and fundamentally changing it to resemble the existing financial system. A few $100 million is nothing compared to what the banks might lose if Bitcoin were running at its full potential. Early Bitcoin adopter and internet personality Stefan Molyneux had this concern as early as 2014 when he predicted that existing financial and political interests would recognize would recognize Bitcoin as a threat and try to slowly capture it. He said, "It's really important for people to understand how big the behemoth is that Bitcoin is facing. There will be efforts on the part of the financial government complex to keep the technology at bay by saying, let's not kill it outright, because it's big enough now that people will see what we've done. Instead, what they're going to try to do is throw little bits of sand in it, until most people find it too cumbersome to use, and then say, well, it was an interesting idea, but it didn't quite work out the way people wanted. I think that is the greatest danger." Molyneux might have been prescient. Regardless of whether malice was involved, we can say with confidence that the Bitcoin of 2024 is far less threatening to existing powers than the Bitcoin of 2014. It is a cumbersome network that pushes users to secondary, controlled layers to have a better experience. Custodial wallets are also easy to control and inject the need for trusted third parties back into the system. In the big picture, Bitcoin's redesign looks remarkably similar to the existing monetary system, where everyday users do not have ultimate control over their own funds and require companies to provide financial services for them. The benefits of this new system are primarily enjoyed by early adopters who benefited from the enormous price appreciation. From the perspective of the original design and purpose of Bitcoin, Blockstream's influence over the protocol has been disastrous. BTC looks nothing like the original Bitcoin, and it's unlikely to in the future. Fortunately, Blockstream does not have a monopoly over all cryptocurrency development, and Bitcoin Cash developers successfully routed around them in 2017, though the process was not easy and involved an enormous amount of pain and drama. All right, we will stop there, and we'll pick up next time at 14, centralizing control. As always, I want to ask you guys to buy a copy of the book on Amazon to support Roger and Steve. Although I don't think they are doing this for the money. I saw a podcast the other day, a debate with Steve, and he said, there's an audiobook online, go read it. I want you guys to read it. It's on YouTube, listen to it, just so I don't have to argue this with anyone anymore. So I imagine Steve's probably pretty supportive of me making this copy of it and get the idea out there. At least I hope so. But most importantly, I want you guys to sign the petition to keep Roger out of prison at www.freerogernow.org. If you made it this far, you've heard me explain what's going on, and that's what motivated me to read this book, was Roger's appearance on Tucker Carlson and the fact that the feds are trying to get him over back taxes when he did absolutely everything he could to pay for them. I'm sure he paid millions of dollars in taxes. It's goofy. It's a political thing, like when he mailed a firecracker. Roger, to me, is up there with Assange and Snowden and Ross. It's free Roger and get the royal flush of political dissidents. Freed. All right. If you got anything left over, there's lots of ways to support me in the description. Patreon, buy me a coffee, crypto addresses. I've never gotten a single crypto donation, so you could be the first. Love you guys. God bless, and I'll see you next time. I'm trying to keep a streak going. I'm incorporating a new, trying to do Duolingo's streak with the freezes, but for my YouTube streams to keep me motivated and keep me going. I've gotten a year on Duolingo Chinese, so I've been very impressed by their system. I'm trying to incorporate it on here so I can keep building my YouTube and making content for you guys. I love audiobooks. I love listening to audiobooks, so I want to make them for people to enjoy. So anyway, if you missed the other parts of the stream, down in the description at the very top, there's a link to all the other videos in the playlist. And hopefully when I'm done, I'll go back through and edit a high quality version all in one file. I'm thinking part of my streak is doing a live stream, but I think I'm going to start just doing punch and roll recording with my audiobooks, so they are, when I'm done with it, it's already fixed, and then I can just edit the pages in and upload the full book. So you might see less of me live, but you'll just get the full completed, good as I can make it book uploaded, and you'll have that one. So that's the way I did my first couple, and I want to go back to that because doing it this way, I make more stuff live in front of people, which motivates me, but it creates literally, this will be probably 15 more hours of editing work when I'm done. So if we can knock that out up front, it would be better, I think, for me overall. I can get more books done and out there. Anyway, maybe the live stream I can do like learning stuff. This is learning stuff, but I don't have to go back and edit like my Ableton or DaVinci videos or politics videos. I guess maybe into smaller videos, but or maybe I could just live stream me punch and roll recording. That would be much less listenable. I don't even know if that would be worth it. Anyway, I'm thinking of it. I think I'm going to go with my very first one. Just more punch and roll recording offline. Upload the finished copy when I'm done. All right. Hey, Evo1, welcome, man. It's good to see you. I'm just signing off. God bless. Everybody get a good night's sleep. And hey, Mr. Wonderful. It's good to see you guys. Thanks for stopping by and saying hello. I was just checking out, but I'm glad to see you here. Everybody go sign freerogernow.org. I love you. God bless you. We'll see you next time. Peace out, boys.